Hello everyone. I hope you are thorough with the theory of Rasa put forward by Ānandavardhana. After Ānandavardhana, the next major literary theoretician to deal with the concept of Rasa was Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka. Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka conceptualized his theory of Rasa in his Hṛdayadarpaṇa, which was lost beyond recall. So, we know of his theory only through excerpts quoted by critics like Abhinavagupta, Hemachandra, Mammata, and so on. We have to be satisfied with a partial understanding of his critical corpus and all the failings that such a partial understanding entail. However, it is safe to say that he was the first to bring the viewer into the Rasa experience. Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka argued that Rasa is not a perceptible product brought forth by the composite working of artistic elements. If Rasa were produced or manifested in the actor, then it would not have become a taste for the spectator. This is because there is no way we can access somebody else's experience through inference. It is also wrong to argue, he said, that Rasa is produced within the spectator. If Rasa were produced within the spectator, it would again bring about another set of problems. The spectator would be so immersed in one or another state of mind, such as passion, disgust, shame, etc., to the point of not being able to enjoy the dramatic performance on the stage. That is to say, if Rasa were internal to the spectator, one would feel actual pain and never again go to the theatre to see sad plays. Second, if Rasa has to be produced within the spectator, there should be a vibhava or causal factor. Where will the spectator find a vibhava to have the Rasa generated within him? During a dramatic performance, what can possibly become a vibhava for the generation of Rasa in the spectator is another character. But in reality, a character can become the vibhava for only another character. In other words, Sita can become a vibhava only for Rama, the character, not for the spectator. Now, it could be argued that when the spectator watches Sita on the stage, he will be reminded of his wife, and this will possibly generate Rasa within the spectator. In other words, since Sita and the spectator's wife could probably share the common attribute of being a wife, one can argue that the image of Sita drives home to the spectator's mind thoughts about his own wife, thereby stimulating his Thayi Bhava. But Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka ruled out this possibility. According to Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka, this is not actually possible in reality. By the romance between Rama and Sita, how could the spectator experience the Sringara Rasa towards Sita, knowing fully well that Sita is a divine being who is beyond his mundane sphere of life? Besides, one cannot find incidents similar to everything that is presented in a drama to get his or her stable emotions stimulated. For example, in the case of the representation of Veera Rasa in an incident like leaping over the ocean and the like, how can the spectator ever claim to have anything in common? An opponent will further argue that while watching the performance of the actor who is doing the role of Rama, the spectator will be reminded of actual Rama and his actions. Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka says that this position is also faulty. How can the spectator get reminded of the actions of actual Rama while watching the character Rama on the stage? Since the spectator has not seen real Rama ever in his life, it is also wrong to argue that the spectator will be reminded of actual Rama as a result of watching the performance of the character on the stage to be in possession of an emotion. It is also wrong to argue that the spectator is said to have perceived Rama through some other means of valid knowledge, such as testimony or inference, to supply a basic for his memory. According to Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka, these various forms of perception lead only to information or jnana, not to rasa, which must be experienced through some other means of knowledge. Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka talks about three crucial components that are conspicuously absent in other uses of language and present only in Kavya. He is of the view that it is the operation of these three elements which gives rise to rasa in a work of literature or art. According to Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka, these three elements include abhidayakatva or denotative function, bhavakatva or ability to realize aesthetic experience, and bhogakritva or the experience of aesthetic emotion. Here, the term abhidayakatva or denotative function should not be understood as a word's ability to denote a meaning. On the other hand, the term abhidayakatva should be understood as a literary language. Pollock observes, for Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka, abhida is extended far beyond its narrow meaning to embrace literary expression as such, including phonic language qualities or gunas and figures of speech or alankaras. In fact, abhida in Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka's usage is best understood as literary language, something completely different from the language of scripture and everyday discourse, as Abhinavagupta describes it. In his commentary on Dhvanyaloka, Abhinavagupta reproduces the view of Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka. Abhinava says, reproducing Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka's view, rather poetic words are of an altogether different nature from ordinary words, thanks to their threefold operation. Their denotative power or abhidayakatva operates within the limits of the literal meaning. Their aesthetic efficacy or bhavakatva operates in the area of the rasas, etc. It transforms the vibhavas, etc. into rasa. And their efficacy of aesthetic enjoyment or bhogakritva operates within the sensitive audience. The working of a poem consists of these three operations. According to Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka, abhida is endowed with a special power called bhavana or revelation. Rasa is revealed by a special power called bhavana or revelation. This power, which has the special function of universalizing or generalizing the things presented or described in drama. During the process of universalization or sadharanikarana, the aesthetic elements such as vibhava, anubhava and vyabhijari bhava are stripped of their particularities, such as this is the divine figure Sita, or she is a queen, or she is another person's or Rama's wife, etc. After the process of universalization, what we get is Sita emptied of all her particularities, which enables us to experience the stable emotion that Rama feels for Sita. Upon the realization of rasa, a third stage known as bhoga or aesthetic relish begins. The rasa revealed by this power of bhavana is then enjoyed through a sort of enjoyment, different from direct experience, from memory, etc. Noli says so. It is clear that Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka believed that the enjoyment of rasa is different from our normal experience of emotion. During the enjoyment of rasas, we do not experience the negative effect that the counterparts of these aesthetic emotions, I mean the sthayi bhavas, have on us in our real life. For example, we enjoy bhayanaka rasa or bibhatsa without being frightened or repulsed. This explains why we enjoy watching horror films or read extremely depressing novels. An aesthetic emotion, universalized by the power of bhavana, gives us a sense of pleasure or happiness. This experience of universalized emotion is so special that the spectator never thinks that it is somebody else's feeling. There is a complete identification with the emotion that the character feels. However, the experience of these universalized emotions differs radically from real life emotions. We are traumatized by tragic events in our life. However, reading or watching Hamlet gives us supreme pleasure despite its oppressively tragic atmosphere because it pertains to the artistic realm. Sadharanikara, or the process of universalization, is at the core of Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka's concept of the Rasa experience. He also considered the process by which the spectator is able to forget, at least temporarily, their personal and practical interest and be immersed in another character's experience as analogical to spiritual experience. As Noli explains, Rasa, the aesthetic experience revealed by the power of revelation or bhavana, is not neotic in character, is not a perception, but an experience, a fruition or bhoga. This fruition is characterized by a state of lysis or laya, of rest into our own consciousness, the pervasion of consciousness by bliss and light. It belongs to the same order as the enjoyment of the supreme Brahman. This shows how his philosophical perceptions colored his aesthetic concepts. More importantly, it also reveals the seriousness with which our ancient critics approached the idea of art and art experience. Furthermore, Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka differed from many of his contemporaries in his view of the purpose of art. He did not agree that the primary function of art was to instruct. He believed that instruction was secondary to the artistic value of the work. So these are the major points that we need to keep in our mind with respect to the theory of Bhaṭṭa Nāyaka on the question of Rasa. I hope you have understood all the major points we discussed today. Thank you.